Well, in the spirit of time, I'm going to kick us off. So, welcome. It's so great to be with you all today for the kickoff of our Intro to Grant Writing series, hosted in partnership with Grant Ready Kentucky. My name's Tasha Sams. I think a good chunk of y'all, but if I don't know you, I'm excited to meet you today. I'm the Director of Education at Main Street America. I'm going to keep this really short, and I'm going to pass the imaginary mic over to Melissa, our instructor, in just a minute. I do want to cover just a few things, though, before we begin. First and foremost, thank you all so much for being with us. This is really special. We have folks joining from all across the country, people who are part of the Main Street movement and others that are not, but please know that everybody is welcome here. Second, an extraordinary thank you to Grant Ready Kentucky. At Main Street America, we take feedback from those who are part of our movement very seriously. And one of the biggest requests that we have received over the last year is to provide more learning experiences around grant writing. And this series is in direct response to that request. So we're so excited for this collaboration. You know, grant writing is a muscle that we all want and need to grow. It's a skill that can be exercised in nearly any leadership role. And finally, I want to remind all of y'all of the value of this learning experience. I really encourage you to take notes. I've already shared the presentations with you. I sent those out via email yesterday. If you registered later in the day or if you registered today, I will make sure to follow up with you via email to make sure you get those presentations. But they're also on Talent LMS. So I'll make sure to put them in a couple locations for you. So I encourage you to take notes, be engaged, and ask questions when it's time. And I really want us to make the most of this time together. So with that, Melissa, I'm going to give the mic to you and let you take us on this journey together.
Thank you. Thank you. So hopefully you guys can hear me. Tasha, can you hear me? Okay. So Tasha mentioned that it is a muscle we all want. I'm not sure about that. How many of you, really thought about when you were in high school, when I grow up, I want to be a grant writer. Folks don't really do that. They don't really think that way. So I don't know that when I graduated or was in high school or graduated high school, I thought, well, yeah, I want to be a grant writer. No, I didn't. But here we all are, whether or not you do it full time or whether or not you do it with 12 different hats that you're taking on and off in your work, or whether you work with other folks that help you. Grant writing is important, and it's important more than ever, especially for organizations that need to build capacity. And so really huge thank you to Main Street America for providing this invaluable service and to be helpful to folks across the nation in building that capacity. And I do believe this 4-part series is going to be helpful to you to do that. So just a little bit about me. I'm not going to read this, but I've been doing this work for a long time. I've been teaching grant writing for a long time. I do have my grant professional certification. There's only about 430, 450 somewhere. That number is going up every day in the nation that has this national certification. Here in Kentucky, there's only 11. And so we are proud of that here at Grant Ready Kentucky. I do have a lot of federal grant experience, but I also have quite a bit of private foundation grant experience. And so I'll be bringing information to you from both sides of that. And a little bit about Grant Ready Kentucky. We are a nonprofit. We are not, we're not here to try to make a buck. We have to pay our bills, but we're not about that. But what we are here for is to help build capacity to under-resourced organizations across the nation, or in Kentucky specifically, but in this case across the nation. So, and who's not under-resourced? So everybody needs some extra help and a hand up. And so one of the things that I really want to bring out and to really stress is that we are smart, capable people. Everyone on this call who is doing this important work for their downtowns, for the revitalization of their communities, you are smart and you are capable. You can do this work. Folks that try to we got to bring somebody in, somebody from the outside, somebody from over there, somebody from Washington, somebody from wherever, to fix us. We don't believe in that. We believe that we can do this work, and we want to build up systems, capacity, people, skills, so that we can do this work. And I believe with a little bit of training, and a little bit of upskilling, I believe that everyone can do that work. And so I think that that's important. So be empowered. Just know that you have got this. You may not have wanted to do this as a high school senior, but you can do it. And so I want you to be encouraged about that. Now, these next couple of slides, we want to learn a little bit about you. And so if you look at this screen here, please get out your phones if you don't mind, and go ahead and take a picture of this QR code. And then you're going to hopefully see on your screen, on your phones, you're going to see your first question. So if you have that, please go ahead and start putting in your responses. We really want to know what sector that your organization represents, because it's and already, just out of 6 folks, look how diversified it already is. But please go ahead and put in there where you think your organization fits. And what's important when we see this is it's not one size fits all, right? It's not everyone is coming from one place.
Melissa, I think maybe go back. I don't think everyone got to scan the QR code.
Absolutely. Let me
Just so
pull
that
that
we
up.
can pull that up.
Let me pull that. Right here's the QR code. You can grab that QR code right there. I apologize. So please grab that QR code right there and go ahead and try to answer those questions. So great. I'm watching the ticker go up. And so I think we had, how many did we end up having join, Tasha? So I can just kind of keep an eye on the numbers here, and I'll know about how many to watch for. Oh, you're on mute.
We're at 78.
78. Okay, so we've got 62 responses right now. It's still inching up a little bit, but obviously the majority of the folks are showing to be in economic development, community and economic development. But I think it's really important to see that this work is not one size fits all, that there are folks from other organizations that are doing this. And what that's going to lead to sometimes is a difference in terminology, a difference in understanding certain concepts. Anyone who's an expert in community and economic development, housing, I mean, that might look a lot different. And so finding ways to cross those barriers are going to be important. Now you should see another question on your screen. Please type in your title. And here, I'm really interested in seeing how many executive directors are in the room. Now, don't put executive director because I said that. Please put in, oh, look, executive director. There you go. No, really, I am hoping that a lot of folks are executive directors. And as you know how a word cloud works, the larger the word, the more folks are in the room that are a part of that. But this one particular training, very particularly, will help executive directors. It helps everyone. But sometimes the boots on the ground folks who are answering the questions and working on the grants and finding the grants, sometimes, they're trying to get things done, or even the executive director says, hey, go get some money. And, they don't necessarily understand that process. So we think it's really important to build up the understanding and the knowledge base for executive directors. So this is fantastic. So there's like 51 responses in the room.
Melissa, is there a way to keep the QR code on the screen?
Well, once you're in, you're in. But
yeah,
yes,
we have
I can do that.
We have a couple people who still have not, been able to scan.
Sorry.
No, it's totally okay.
I'll just have to open it with each slide, but I can do that. Yep. No problem. Just grab me if I don't. Totally. So, but this is really interesting. Folks are continuing to respond, and so I love seeing all these different names. This is another point. Look at all the different titles, levels of folks that are working on downtown revitalization, on working on improving your community. At all levels, this is working. And so I think this is really helpful and important. So thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to advance to the next slide. I'm going to bring the QR code up again. So tell us, where are you from? So I am sure that the majority of folks are going to be from rural communities, but as you see, some are not. And so I think it's really important, again, to understand it's not one size fits all. What is needed in an urban or a suburban area may look very different than what is needed in a rural area. And we understand that. And so a lot of the information you're going to get to today is will be helpful in all cases, but know that we understand that it's not one size fits all. Okay, got a couple more questions. Let's see, a few more folks are answering. I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide now. Here's another question. There's the QR code. Do you have a solely dedicated grant professional? Now, that means you're not wearing two hats, or your person is not wearing two hats. All their job is to just work on grants. Maybe, and it doesn't count if you're hiring an outside person, okay, because that's not your person. So we're looking for your person. This is exactly what I expected. Is you don't, we don't. This is one of probably 10 or 12 hats that you're wearing. Nobody has one hat anymore. I was hired at my previous employer as a grant writer. When I left there 14 years later, I had 4 responsibilities, not just grant writing anymore. So even some folks that may be hired as a grant writer, they may find other responsibilities. So 92% of you do not have a solely dedicated person on staff. So you're having to juggle a lot of different things. We see you. We understand that. So we've got one more question. Have you received any grant dollars? This could be federal or this could be private. It does not count donations now. If you got a big donation, that doesn't count. We're talking about federal or private foundations. You guys are rocking the world. Now that no is inching up some, but you guys are rocking the world. I'm watching the numbers. What is so cool about this is on the previous slide, you said we do not have a dedicated grant writer, which means that you're doing double or triple or quadruple duty, but yet you are being successful in getting grants. Go you. That's just fabulous. That's fabulous. So thank you for answering those couple of questions there. So we'll come back over here and jump right into the presentation. So what is grant readiness? And let me just say, I want you to be thoughtful about your organization. Now, most of you said that you received a grant. Now, we didn't ask whether or not you got a federal grant, whether you got a private foundation grant. That's okay. But in some cases, you may be ready for a small grant, but you may not be ready for a large grant. And a large grant would be like maybe in the high 6 figures or 7 figures. That's kind of what I think of when I think of a large grant. $100,000 or smaller in the overall grant world is a small grant, not in the private foundation world, but in the overall world, that's a small grant. But anyhow, so we want to investigate and take a close look at our own organization to see whether or not we are grant ready. So it's 3 aspects. Are you ready to apply for the grant? Do you have the resource capacity to implement and deliver the project, to keep the funder happy? Do you have what you need to do what you said you were going to do? And then, can you manage it and close it out And at the end, when you press submit or send or whatever, and you say, we're done, is that funder happy with you? Many grants that we have can be reoccurring, and keeping that funder happy is really important. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. But know this, for those folks that are grant seeking, be careful what you ask for, because you might get it. And if you get that grant, are you ready? Because that middle column is critical. You will have to upskill your organization. You're going to have to grow your capacity. You're going to have to increase production. You're going to have to hire some people, or you're going to have to add another hat to someone. And many times folks are like, well, here, you do it. Well, I know someone at an organization who has a full-time job, and they're managing 8 grants in addition to their full-time job. Now, let's think about that. I wonder how well that's going. You think that all those funders are happy? Do you think that person is being successful and juggling all of those balls correctly? We got to make sure that we are equipping our organization and our people to do the work we say that we're going to do. Also, let me just say this. As we go through, Tasha is manning the chat and watching. I want this to be interactive. If you have questions, please raise your hand. Or if you're throwing a question in the chat, Tasha, just let me know, and let's answer those as they came up. So, and I may even pause occasionally and see if there are any questions, but we want this to be interactive. So feel free to ask any questions as we go. Okay, so continue. What is grant readiness? This very first bullet point, identifying funding needs. So lots of times, and we're going to do this in a later session and a later Thursday, is, well, I need a bus. I need signage downtown. I need accessible sidewalks. I need park benches. I need some lights, and I need to bury the utilities underground for downtown to make it more beautiful, right? So we know the stuff we need to do. Well, here's the question that I would say. Why do you need that? You need those park benches. Why? You need those flower pots. Why? You need to bury your underground utilities. Why? So what you know is you need stuff, but that's not the need. That's the stuff. The stuff will be the solution. So you need to understand and think about what does our community need to have a better downtown revitalization? How can we make it go smoother? How can we help it along? How can we encourage small business? What can we do ultimately? Not what does the organization need? Also, you need to make sure that if you're looking at a grant, are you eligible? I didn't ask this question, but most of you, or many of you, might be with your municipality. You might be city or state government. Some of you may be nonprofits. Some of you could be a citizen action group, or a council or something that's gotten together. You need to make sure that you're eligible and that you can actually apply for a particular grant or a series of grants that you're interested in. You need to have a project plan. I cannot tell you how often somebody finds a grant, especially executive directors in the room. Somebody will email you a grant, and then you'll pass that on to your person, or maybe that person is you, and say, well, we're going to apply for that. What for? What's the plan? What is the project? What is the priority? Within your efforts downtown, do you know what your priorities are? If I said type them in the chat, can you tell? Actually, go ahead and do that, and Tasha can look at those. Type in your #1 priority for your program, your downtown program right now. Type that in. And if you don't know, please type that in too. Be honest, be transparent. And when I say a priority, now this is not what we think, oh, well, we could use this or that. This is something that your organization has discussed, and you say, this is our priority. And what I would encourage you is that if you don't know, or you don't have a priority, is that within your organization, you talk and you think about and you establish some priorities. And they're going to be able to develop a project plan around that. Also, you need to know that, and you probably do, but maybe not, that there's a lot of grants that reoccur. And so you want to create a grant calendar. And because what'll happen, it's happened to me many times, the perfect grant crosses my desk and it's due the day after tomorrow. You can't apply for that. I mean, that's just, you might try, you might kill yourself to try to do that, but don't do that. But you know that's a reoccurring grant. So you're in it for the long haul. So you're going to put that on a calendar and you're going to come back and look at that later, maybe 60 or 90 days before it's due next year, and begin a plan for that. But you can create a grant calendar. Also, of course, you can research grant opportunities. There's a variety of ways to do that. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. You need to gather your documentation. We'll actually look at some documentation, but you need to have documentation. You need to have that ready. You kind of need to have that. I call it a toolbox. You need to have that in your toolbox and ready to go. The worst thing that can happen is you're getting ready to submit a grant and you need your financial statement and your CFO is in the Caribbean on a cruise and you can't get that information. So you need to make sure that you have that in your toolbox and you have that ready to go. Also, you got to have a team. This is not putting a person in a closet and saying, come out with a check. That doesn't happen that way. You have to have a team. There needs to be a team approach. And you need to do some organizational assessment because you may look and go, well, yeah, we're looking at it, but we don't have this, this, or this. So we'll get into a little bit more about that. So we talked about the priority projects, or we talked about that project plan. Hopefully you have some strategic initiatives. Maybe you're aligning to something with the city or something with the county, or maybe you have your own strategic initiatives. If you don't, you need to ask, what are our strategic initiatives? If you don't have some, you might need to think about it and get some. So figure out what you want your strategic initiatives to do, and that will help you decide what your priority projects are, so that when that grant crosses your desk, it is a very clear yes or no. You don't have to think about it. Well, what kind of idea can we come up with and make it fit into this grant? If you're having those kinds of conversations, you're on the wrong page. You need to be able to have a grant come across your inbox and you say, this fits perfectly with burying the underground utility lines downtown. Because we knew that that was a priority. We want to be able to have some kind of event downtown, and we need to be able to have big access up in the air. And we can't do that right now because of the utility lines. We want to put new things down there and we can't. So that fits perfect. But if you're trying to figure out a project to fit into a grant, that is what we call chasing the money. And you don't want to chase the money. You need to make sure you have clear objectives. You also need to know to make sure that your idea fits in with the community. We all sometimes think we know what the community wants, but in a grant application, how can you provide evidence of that? Have you assessed the community? Oh Lord, we can't pay to have somebody come in and do an assessment. Well, could you do a Facebook survey? Could you do a poll? Could you go out downtown during an event and walk around with a clipboard and ask some folks, some questions and do your own assessment? But you want to validate and know that your project fits into what the community is interested in. Maybe the community has their project, maybe a community entity has their project, and your project dovetails into that. That can be evidence in your application. Do you have the resources? Do you know what it's going to take to deliver this project? Because let me just say, 9 times out of 10, it is not all provided through the grant dollars. Many times your organization still has to step up and provide other resources. And if everyone already has 4 different hats, can they really add a 5th hat? So you have to think like that. Then what's going to be the potential? How are you going to impact? How are you going to measure that impact? Is it going to be a meaningful impact? Right. We listened to, I don't know if any of you were on this call, but the grant plant had a webinar yesterday about federal appropriations. And they were talking about how to go after federal appropriations. And everyone right now is so hypersensitive to projects that were funded that went nowhere. The bridge to nowhere, you know, everybody's heard about the bridge to nowhere. Now that's an extreme example, but can your project that you want to put forward in a grant application, are you going to be able to have impact? Are you going to be able to measure that impact? And then how are you going to sustain it? And let me just say, the answer is not with another grant. How are you going to sustain the work that you're going to do? I don't know if you've seen this in your community, but unfortunately, I've seen this in some communities that they will get a grant and they'll go build some beautiful thing. And I used to work at, a long time ago, I used to be the director of aging here in my county. And we had a beautiful log building that we had our programming out of, and it was wonderful. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's huge. I mean, it's probably 4,000 plus square feet. I think it really was a log home floor plan, like a house, and they converted it into a senior center. It's just gorgeous. The problem is they haven't kept it up. You go in and the floors are a disaster. You know, they're wood floors all throughout, beautiful wood floors, but not anymore. You know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to it. So how do we sustain what we get? So who's eligible for private foundations? Of course, nonprofits are private foundation grants. Of course, nonprofits are eligible. Faith-based organizations are normally eligible. But you have to pay attention to that because, for instance, in my work previously at a community college, the community college was not an eligible applicant, but we had a private foundation. We had our own private foundation that was associated with the college, and they were eligible as an applicant. So if you're not, maybe somebody else within your organization or your partnership or your community, maybe they have the appropriate designation. But private foundation grants are certainly an opportunity. Now, for federal grants, a lot of other folks are eligible, even private industry. Not for everything, but there are certain federal grants that private industry are eligible to apply for. But mostly you see public agencies and you see nonprofits. Now there's a big list of public agencies. Don't be misled as well. That's who gets the majority of the money. Not necessarily. It's just that that's one category, and then there's a lot of other categories in the center. But these are all different kinds of folks that can apply for federal grants. And sometimes folks are not aware that business and industry can actually be an applicant in certain circumstances. So private versus federal. In a private foundation grant, it's very much about relationship building. Very seldom, if you send a grant application as like a cold call to a private funder, is it going to get any traction? It is it's very relationship oriented. Sometimes you have to be invited. And so you have to build that relationship to get to that place. The cool thing is though, if you apply and you get the award, they'll send you a check. So I don't know how many folks on here get federal. Hey, can you, I can't see everybody, but can you raise your hand if you've gotten a federal grant? You can actually raise your hand if you want instead of, okay, I see. Oh, look, there's one, two, there's a few. Okay. So there's a few folks that have gotten it. So what you might not know about federal grants, if some have gotten it and some have not, is that most federal grants work on a reimbursement basis. We'll talk about that in a minute. So that's what's so attractive about private foundations is they'll send you a check, and that's great. They're also typically smaller. I mentioned a moment ago, $100,000 for a private foundation. Now we're not talking about the Bill Gates and and the Zuckerberg, and I mean, those folks, the MacArthur Foundation, those folks can give millions of dollars, and we know that. We're talking about, the kinds of foundations within our states, or maybe a multi-state foundation that we might be looking to. That's going to be a smaller amount. And so $100,000 for a private foundation grant is really pretty big. Also, the reporting is less stringent. Lots of times they want you to kind of give a report. Many times it's not even until the end of the project. Whereas a federal funder may ask for quarterly reports. It's very flexible in how it's spent. Most of the time, funders, they don't want to contribute to a fundraising campaign. They don't want to necessarily do building and construction. They really like programmatic kind of work. Now, some do. Again, I'm talking about generally speaking. But a lot of them also operate on a geographic basis. So it may be a perfect fit, but they're only serving, upstate Maine. And so it doesn't fit for everyone. I won't read the rest of these, but you want to make sure, because you'll get a copy of this, you just want to make sure that you understand kind of going into it, what to expect from a private foundation. Any questions here? I want to just stop and see if there's any questions about private foundation grants. Okay. So what to expect about federal grants? There's a lot less on this page, but let me tell you, there's a lot more to it. So be ready. Get ready to roll your sleeves up. Understand that it's really important to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. A grant project is typically not shovel ready. If you need funding in 2 months, a federal grant is not the way to go. Many federal grants, you're not going to see a dollar for at least 12 months. So you need to go into it understanding that this is the long haul, that it could be 12 to 18 months before you get to spend the first dollar. So you need to kind of understand that going in. You need to expect that they're not going to send you a check. You're going to have to spend money first and then get reimbursed. So some folks, like we worked with some folks that had a really small bank account. So they had $4,000 in their checking account and they got a $2 million Economic Development Administration grant. Now let's think about that for a minute. I just told you that you got to advance first. This was for construction. Does anybody know how much an engineer cost on a project like that? And that engineer is going to say, well, we need 50% up front. They got $4,000 in the checking account. So we had to work with them to find ways where they were going to be able to advance that money. They were able to do it through it's kind of like a bond, sort of. They were a government entity. And so it's kind of like a bond. It's actually called a lease agreement. It was not anything I was familiar with at the time, but apparently is fairly common in county and city government. And so they basically have a line of credit through their state to be able to do this work. So there are ways to do it, but you just need to, do you have that in place? Have you thought about it? Do you know how you're going to handle that? I don't know how many folks have a on-staff attorney. Most do not. Now, if you work for your county or your city, you probably do, but nonprofits don't typically have legal counsel on staff. You're going to have to make sure that you have legal counsel review these documents. Please, please, please do not sign a grant agreement. Do not sign anything official with the federal government until someone else has reviewed it. Lots of people think, well, I don't have any choice. I can't negotiate it. Yes, you can. You can negotiate language in your grant agreements. Please don't sign anything without having legal counsel review it. Also, you need to be able to build relationships with your funders. Here in Kentucky, we have friendly funders. Like, I don't know how many of you work with USDA. USDA here in Kentucky is a friendly funder. The Economic Development Administration, they are friendly funders. The Appalachian Regional Commission, for those of you that are in the Appalachian area, those are friendly funders. And you can establish relationships with those folks. And before anyone actually sends you a declination notice Sometimes they'll say, hey, I need for you to send me a little bit more. I got some questions about this, or can you tweak this or tweak that? Without that relationship, sometimes that doesn't happen. So
Melissa,
spend,
we have a question in the chat. Is that
yes,
cool?
please. Yes,
Hillary wants to
please.
know, what do you mean by friendly funder?
Okay, what do I mean by friendly funders? Let me tell you, let me answer that by telling you some folks that aren't. The Department of Education and the Department of Labor are not friendly funders. And what do I mean by that? So within the Department of Education, they're big, right? And so they have a lot of money that they quote unquote give away, except they're not. Um, but what will happen is in your application, this actually just recently happened a few years ago with the Upward Bound program. Don't know how many folks in here know about Upward Bound, but they rejected applications because people single spaced their tables. Didn't have anything to do with the content, didn't have anything to do that the project didn't align with their mission. It was because they single spaced their tables. These friendly funders that I'm mentioning are not like that. They are in it to bring needed resources to the community to make a difference. That's what they're intending to do. And so you can build those relationships. The Department of Education, Department of Labor, they don't have any boots on the ground. You're talking to the big cog in Washington, D.C. These other folks that I've mentioned all have state representatives who live and breathe in the state, and they have a vested interest in seeing their state do better. And so they want to work with you, not just find a way to kick your proposal out. So I hope that that helped answer that question. So again, you can build those relationships and find out. And how do you do that? Well, you can start out with an email. You can pick up and schedule a phone call or a Zoom call. You know what you can also do? You can get in your car and you can drive down to where their offices are in your state and you can meet with them. And yes, we did that. And that is successful. That's for another story though. And again, not all grants are the same. I just threw Department of Labor under the bus. I've written and we've received and managed several Department of Labor grants. We hate them. So they're hard, they're complicated. There's a lot of reporting that goes along with it. It's a necessary evil, but we know going into that that is going to be a very difficult funder. And it's like, be careful what you ask for because you're going to get it. And then you can work with another funder, like let's just say USDA again, and it's a dream. It's a dream. So one federal grant is one federal grant. They are not all the same, and you just need to think kind of through that. Also, we've had instances, again, executive directors here in the room, you can only spend that grant money for what you say you're going to spend it on. Now, that sounds like a no-brainer, right? But it's very particular. We had a grant, and this was a USDA grant, so this was a friendly funder. And we were working with some staff, and they were building some curriculum, and the program person at the institution bought some computers for them. There was money in the supply category, but we didn't say anything about computers. It's $16,000 worth of computers, actually. And they bought these computers, but they were not in the scope. They were not in the budget. Not only did we have to take out $16,000 from our grant because it was spent, but we also had to pay for those computers ourselves. So we ended up losing $32,000 on the project because they said, hey, you spent $16,000. We're going to subtract that from the total. It was an ineligible expense. We're not going to reimburse you for it, but we're going to subtract that from the total because you did spend that money, but now you got to pay for it. So please make sure that you understand exactly how those grant funds can be spent, and that you only spend them in the right way. And ultimately avoid mission drift. And this really can apply also to your private foundation grants. This happens when we're chasing the money. Do not compromise what your organization believes in and what its priorities are just to get a dollar. Don't apply for a grant just to bring some money in and find out that the missions don't align. And here was an example, a real example. I was doing a training, and someone who was representing a hospital's foundation, they mostly all have foundation arms. She said, I know exactly what you're talking about. We did this. She said, we got a housing grant to build houses. She said, we're a hospital foundation. And she said, all of my effort was diverted from building capacity and resources for the hospital to over here building houses. Somebody thought that was a good idea because they wanted $1. And so be very careful that you don't do that, because that grant will take time, and it will take time away from the important work that you're trying to accomplish. Not every grant is a good grant. Questions? Okay, so when we look inside of our organizations and we say, what do we need within our organizations to be successful and again, in successful grant seeking? Sometimes there are policies that federal funders require that we don't know about. So again, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I'm going to read these. How many of you have a written conflict of interest policy? How many of you have a written whistleblower policy? How many of you have a documented policy on record retention and destruction? What do you do with your records? How many of you have an employee compensation policy? How many of you have a gift acceptance policy? How many of you have a fiscal management policy? These are all things that you need to have in place to be grant ready. Now, I'm not telling you that every single funder is going to ask for this. And again, this is federal, but many will. And here's the thing, they won't ask it as an attachment for when you are applying for the grant. Once you get the award letter, they'll say, send us a copy of your whistleblower policy. Oh, we don't have one. Then all of a sudden there's all this scrambling and shuffling and trying to figure out how to fraudulently backdate something. Don't do that. So let's get prepared to do that. Let's look at these documents here, and let's think about making sure that those documents are in your toolbox. And by the way, when you get the presentation, there's a link here. I'm not going to click on it, but there's a link there that you can go and read more about that.
Okay, that was going to be my question, Melissa. I felt like it was a dumb one, but I wanted to make sure that that link was going to take them to where they could learn more about each of those
Yes,
policies. Okay.
they can learn more about that there. Yes. Okay, so here is expertise. So do you have oh, sorry, I was trying to close something. Do you have expertise for managing a grant? If you have grants within your organization right now, and a grant is coming to an end, and you've got somebody paid under that grant, and you need to say, well, we got another grant coming in, we'll just move this person from here to here, or we'll give the mayor's nephew the job of managing that grant, or internally, my sister-in-law needs a job. Let me just say that you need to have the right person managing the grant, because it will be mission critical when the reporting comes due and you have to report out on the metrics and on the progress, that you have got the right person. And let me also say, now in some cases we have to hire somebody because we don't have them. And sometimes that's a great thing about grants, is it allows us to bring in new people to increase the capacity of our organization. But if you have someone internally who is going to manage that grant, please make sure that that person is at the table with you working on that grant. They need to be the champion. And volunteering someone, we're going to put you in this project. You're going to and they don't know anything about it. It's not their passion. It's not they're not championing it. They don't have any say in how the grant was written or what we were doing with the grant. When we do that, we kind of get what we ask for. And so we want to be careful that we make sure the right person is going to manage it. We also need to make sure that they work very closely, if they're already in the organization, that they work very closely with your financial person. If it's an outside accountant, doesn't matter. They need to work very careful and closely with them when you're developing budgets and you're going to get into the fiscal management of that, because you can go to jail if you mismanage federal dollars. Please don't go to jail. So we want to make sure that we are doing everything correctly and the way that we need to. So you need to make sure that they're working together. And I bring this to the attention because sometimes within organizations, there's hierarchy, right? And so the CFO, got a C-suite up here, and these people are up here, and then you hire in a project manager that's down here. And the idea of these two people working together on a daily basis, sometimes that doesn't seem, maybe there's 2 or 3 layers, in between. We need to move away from that, and we need to empower that grant manager to be able to work directly with the people that they need to, whether it's a chief financial officer, whether it's somebody within facilities, whatever the circumstance, you need to make sure that you connect those folks together. If you have to hire a grant manager, make sure that you've written a good, strong job description in your grant application that has all of the requirements that is needed for that job. And many times, if you correctly draft that job description and put it in the grant application, that avoids somebody's brother-in-law being moved into that position, because you have to adhere to exactly what the grant says. And if the grant says the person has to have this experience, this degree, this skill set, then I actually had a funder, and this has only happened one time, but I was really taken aback. We were going to hire someone. They wanted to see the resume of the person, and then they wanted to approve the hire. So once we saw the resume and we sent it to them, they wanted to, yes, you can hire that person. And then we even had to send them the executed letter where they came on board and they actually hired. Not a lot of folks do that, but they can. It's their money. It's their right. And so they may want to know who you're hiring and whether or not they are qualified. So make sure that job description is exactly what describes exactly the person that you need. If you have a principal investigator, that's what we call the person who's going to kind of manage the grant, either external that you hire or somebody internal. When you get that grant, make sure they know exactly what their job is. So many times I see a grant come in and they're like, yay, we got the grant. And then somebody just assumes in the magic, cloud that all the work starts happening and getting done. You need to have a kickoff meeting, and you need to make sure everybody that's going to have to do something on that grant knows exactly what that is. That principal investigator needs to know that grant application and that grant award letter inside and out. They need to know exactly what is required of them and what the expectation is. Don't just assume. Well, I sent them an email and I sent them the document. So what's the problem? Well, take some time, everybody go through it, make sure everybody is on the same page. Any questions about this?
And y'all feel free to drop questions in the chat. I'm happy to bring them back up anytime. So if there are questions that come up, just drop them there in the chat and I'll make sure to get them over to Melissa. I know we have one in the, all right, let's not.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about this already, how to effectively manage a grant. You need to make sure you've got the grant award. You've got it. You're ready to go. Do you understand the grant requirements? Now, you know what you wrote in the grant, hopefully. You know what you wrote, but you need to look at that grant agreement that they send you and that everybody signs off on. What does it say? What is it requiring? All the terms and conditions. What does it say about things you can't spend the money on? What does it say about reporting? You need to make sure that not just you, but everyone that's going to be participating in this, that they understand what those grant requirements are. You also need to make sure that there is a plan on how to deliver it. Now, there's software, not if things are expensive. I don't know how many folks on the call are using like Microsoft Office, like Go or Office 365. Don't know if you are, but there's a planner, which is like a smaller, lesser version of Project. You can even use an Excel spreadsheet. That's fine. But you need to have a tracking system of what needs to be done and when, and guess what? By who? The principal investigator does not do everything. The business office is going to have to do something. Facilities is going to have to do something. This department, that department, do they know? Do they know they have to do something on the project? Purchasing. You just need to make sure that they all know. Need to make sure that you've set up a budget for this. Now, most of you said that you had gotten a grant, but do you, and I'll just say this, because it's important, but remember that money cannot be commingled. So when you get a grant, that money has to be kept separate. You cannot commingle that with your general funds. So you need to have a system in place, even if it's QuickBooks, that's fine. But you need to be able to press a button and run a report with an account number that has separated that money. You have to have the ability to do that, and you're going to have the ability to do that so you can send those reports to the funder. And then you have to have, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Melissa. I think this is a good question, kind of related,
Yes.
but a little different from Hillary. Do funders ever fund a piece of a larger project where you will get funding from multiple sources? So as an example, 50,000 toward a $200,000 park renovation.
Absolutely. I call that cobbling it together. Now, let me give you a true example of a large project. Was working with an organization that was building almost an $8 million facility. You can't get $8 million from one funder. So we had to go to 3 different places. We got 1.5 million from one place. We got 2.88 from somebody else. We got 1.5 from somebody else. We got $800,000 from a private donor. So we cobbled that funding together. And on large projects, large is relative. So this $200,000 park renovation could be a very large project for your community. I don't diminish that. Many times we have to find funding from different sources. The problem is that you're getting funding from multiple sources, and you're going to have to manage those multiple funding opportunities. And sometimes folks will say, well, they have to pay first and then we'll pay. And you have to spend all that money first before we'll give you any money. And so again, you have to work together and keep everybody abreast. But I will also say that it is competitive. So on another project that we were working, it was like an $8 million, again, it was a big, like a renovation kind of thing. Well, no, it was a construction kind of thing. We got the green light on a 7-figure grant. And I was able to then come over to another funder and say, hey, we've got these guys on board for this dollar amount. They really believe in the project. And they were like, yeah, oh yeah, okay. And they ended up providing funding. But they provided funding because other people had skin in the game. And so that is attractive. If you can't get all the money from one place, it's attractive to be able to say, we've got a commitment from these guys, and we've got some donors, and we're putting some more money into it. So yes, the answer to that is you can do it. It's going to be complicated, but it can be competitive. So hopefully that answers some of that. So again, as part of managing a grant, you need to make sure you keep the communication open. If there's a problem, and there will be a problem, by the way, there will be a problem. Doesn't matter if it's a private foundation grant, doesn't matter if it's a federal grant. There will be a problem, and you will have to tell the funder there's a problem. And so, but we're going to fix it, and we know how to fix it. But you want to make sure you keep that open communication. But you have to know what to communicate. So internally within your organization, you have to have open communication. You need to encourage folks not to hide problems because they think they may get in trouble. Stuff happens in the grant world. I have yet to work on a grant and see it from start to completion that ran completely smooth. And if somebody tells you that it did, they're lying. Doesn't work that way. Okay. There will always be problems. So it's not a reflection of somebody's bad performance. Now, can somebody come in and do something illegal or wrong or be lazy and not do the work? Sure. But we're going to give folks the benefit of the doubt. No, that's not what's happening. Something just happened that was outside of our control. Funders understand that. Now, funders don't understand illegal, but funders understand when things happen that are outside of your control. Okay. And then you have to make sure that you know about the compliance and the risk management. Now, we gave you a list of documents earlier, making sure that you have those in your toolbox. That's part of it. And again, does everybody know about those policies? Or did you just draft a policy, send it to them, and then put it in a folder and nobody knows about the policy? So what does the policy mean? Does everyone in the organization understand the policy? Are they adhering to the policy? That's compliance and risk management. So you need to make sure everyone is kind of on that same page. And then you need to evaluate and you need to document impact. And we're going to talk a little bit more later about data collection because that fits into this category.
Melissa, we have a question.
Please.
Should we use separate accounts for each funder if there are multiple funders?
Yes. Actually, it's not funders, it's grants. And I distinguish that because you could have two grants from the same funder. Every grant needs to have its own account number. Now, hear me, I'm not saying you have to go down to the bank and open two accounts. You can, you absolutely can. You can do that, no problem. But your accounting system has to be sophisticated enough that it can give them account numbers. Now, if you don't have that, then maybe you do need to go down to the bank and open up two different accounts. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to run reports on each grant, not each funder, but each grant. So hopefully that answered that. So coming back to a team, I see too many times. Now, some of you, just a handful, answered the question that yes, we do have a grant professional on staff. This is not how successful grant seeking happens. Here's a grant, go to your office, close the door, come out with a check in 6 months. That's not how grant seeking works. It takes a team. And let me explain, I've done this for a long time and I facilitate folks because, like for instance, I got a welding grant. Now I had to write about welding. I had to write about the kinds of equipment. I had to write about how we were going to help people learn how to. Do I look like a welder to you? Do I look like somebody who knows about welding? I do not. So I had to have a content expert at the table to help describe welding to me. I don't know what that is. This organization that we helped got a nuclear medicine program. Do I look like a nuclear physicist? I promise I'm not. And so we had to have content experts involved. Your finance people have to be involved. The people who the project is going to impact and who have something to do has to be involved. It takes a team to do this work. I don't know how many of you have data people, but it's really important to have your data person involved. If you don't have a data person, that's part of being grant ready. We're going to talk about that here in a moment, but you have to be able to collect data on your work, your organization, and your projects. We'll talk about that in a moment, but that person has to be at the table. Sometimes, especially in the work you guys are doing, you may need a partner at the table that's outside of your organization. You may need a business owner. You may need the arts organization. We'll be looking at some of those examples here in a moment, but you need to make sure that you have the right people at the table and that they have ownership in helping you craft your project. So more about those outside folks. Federal funders expect collaboration. And I can tell you that with the new change in Washington, there's going to be less money. I think we all kind of know that. And with that means that we're going to have to get together and collaborate and make the dollars that we're going to have available go further. And so you need to make sure that you're collaborating. And many successful grants, they actually require partners. They'll even say, you've got to have this person at the table and this person at the table. And what you don't do is call somebody the day before and that you'd have never met before. You just know the organization is down the street. And you say, can I send you a letter of support? Will you sign this? My grant's due tomorrow. And you've never had a conversation. You've never had a meeting. You've never worked together. As part of being grant ready, you need to be building those partnerships right now. You need to be building those partnerships yesterday and make sure you're involved in all of the community stuff, your civic clubs, the chamber, all of those places. Make sure your fingers are in all of that, and that you don't cold call somebody for a partnership letter the day before something is due. And many times they need to be involved and at the table. So when you have a letter, it's not helpful for them to say, we love Main Street America. We really hope you get this grant, pat you on the back. We just love you and we love the work you're doing. That's not helpful to anybody. A partner letter has to have action items in it. What is that partner going to do? Number one, number two, number three. What are the tangible action items that partner is going to do? I call the others I love you letters. And I love you letters are not helpful in a grant application. I'm glad everybody loves you. That's good, but that's not helpful in a grant application. Partners are people who are actively involved and are going to be doing things with you and on your project. Also, to be grant ready, you need to have a certain set of documents. I mentioned to you earlier, but it's true, is because I've seen this happen when somebody needed a current financial statement and the CFO or the high business person, they weren't there. And the grant was due, and they're like, we got to find a copy. Does anybody have access to Susie's computer? Can anybody get on there? And you might find it at the end of the day, but how much stress is that? Let's do better planning, and let's create a toolbox, and let's have these things in our toolbox so that they are ready to go. And all we have to do is open up that file folder on our desktop, pull it out, and attach it. Now, let me say the top one in the middle, 501c3 determination letter. Lots of folks will say, well, we don't need that because they go out there and they check that federal database. Well, I'm here to tell you that yes, they can, absolutely. But funders are still asking nonprofits to attach the letter. Do you know where your letter is? So make sure, I tell a little funny story. When I was over the aging program, I had the original 1966 letter from the IRS establishing the nonprofit status. I kept it in a folder in the safe. Now, things are a little different now. We can scan things in and all of that. But back then, I was terrified I was going to lose that original letter. So just make sure you know where your stuff is, make it readily available. Now, certain things are going to change. Like, for instance, that financial statement. That financial statement, you need to put it on your calendar to say, I need to get a current financial statement. Then you use that for the year. Then get another current financial statement. Get a current budget. Budgets, and as you know, in financial statements are different. Audits. You're a small 501c3. Well, we can't afford an audit. Sometimes you can get away with that, but certain cases, you need to show that you have integrity and capacity, and it's good to invest in an audit. It's a part of being grant ready. So be thinking about that.
Melissa, I have a question. It relates to the discussion we were having around the team.
Yes.
Jennifer asks, is this sometimes the ADD office, or is this team sometimes the ADD office? So she's referring to the area development district.
Yes, it could be. It could be. It could be that and all of the above. So, for instance, let's take, for example, the Economic Development Administration grants. They require buy-in from the area development districts. Now, that's what they're called here in Kentucky. They might be called that in other places, but you all across the nation, we all have the equivalent. They just might be called something different. And you're going to have those by region across your state. And there are certain funders, especially in economic development, and a lot of this is considered economic development. Those districts are required to have comprehensive economic development plans, and we call them SEDS, strategies actually, they're called SEDS. They're required by law to have those. And some funders want to make sure that your project is aligning with that plan. And to evidence that, of course, you would cite the plan, but to evidence that, you could get a letter from that district to say that it aligns. Now, that is a little bit like an I love you letter, okay? Because that, in that case, they're saying this project aligns with the strategic initiatives of our community. We like it. We buy in. We think that it is working toward the common goal, if that makes sense. That is an example.
We got a few questions coming through.
Yeah,
I want to make
please.
sure to
Go right ahead.
give them their airtime. Diane says, let me see, worked with a founder that refused to get an outside audit. Is this a red flag?
Well, you love it when people say it depends. If it's a tiny nonprofit, okay, if it's a tiny nonprofit, sometimes it's just not economically feasible. So depending upon the size, if it is a nice size organization, then I might have a concern. I would probably want to probe a little deeper and ask, what is the reason that you do not have an audit? What is the reason that you are not providing or you're not going to get an audit? Because in some cases they're really small, and we all know that audits can be very expensive. But I would need to know more. I would need to understand. It's not an automatic red flag, but it could be a red flag.
All right, and we have another question. Brian, do you want to just come off chat or come off mute and ask your question?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
A voice. Yay, a voice.
Yeah, thanks. I was just curious about the frequency of the audits. Is it every year, every 2 years, every 3 years? And then do you need to hire like a professional accounting firm, or can that be done
That's
by
a definite. That's a definite. Here's what I recommend with audits is that you have a policy. Remember that fiscal management policy? You're going to discuss audits in that, and you're going to provide evidence that you're following your policy. So if in your fiscal management policy, you say we get an audit every 3 years, show evidence that you're following that 3-year policy. If you say every 2, now I'm just going to say, the larger the budget, the more frequent you should get an audit. If you have if you've got a 7 or an 8-figure budget, you need to be getting an audit every year, okay? If you are much smaller, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, you can probably go every 2 or 3 years. But whatever you do, show that you're following your policy. Is that helpful? Other questions? Okay. So, any questions about any of the things on this screen, anything that folks may not understand or know about? I say state statutes because fiscal courts, cities, higher education, those kinds of folks, they have statutes. They don't have a 501c3 determination letter from the IRS. So just make sure you have those things handy and readily available for you.
Well, so we're getting some good questions. I hate to keep jumping in, but
no, I want you to.
I know you
Please.
do. I know. So Lisa says, if you're under a municipality, can you use their yearly audit?
Yes, because you are under that municipality. So that absolutely you can. You are not, if you are a program within a city or a county, you're not expected to have your own audit. You fall under their purview. I'm assuming, let me ask this question, if this person could answer in the chat. Does that person's paycheck, I'm going to assume they're a paid person, does that person's paycheck come from, I don't remember if they say county or city?
Yep. They said yes, comes from the
Okay.
municipality. Yep.
It's the same, you're under that same purview. Yes, 100%. Now, let me comment on that and say, those of you that are within a larger organization, make sure when you submit a grant that the lead person in charge, because it's not always the mayor or the county judge. Sometimes they have, city managers and things like that. Make sure that they sign off on these applications. Don't go rogue and submit an application on your own if you're under that purview. Because it's happened before where I've saw the leader, whoever that is at whatever level, because I didn't agree to that. We're not going to do that. I don't want that. That's not the kind of project I'm interested in. I want to do this. I don't want to do the revitalization of the park. I want to build a new rec center. I don't want to do that. And so you need to make sure that whatever entity that you're under, that main person, whoever, where the buck stops, make sure that they are the ones that sign off on those applications and that they are agreeable to that. So we talked a little bit already about accounting systems, but do understand that grants work on an accrual accounting system. And that's where, like I was saying, you have to, submit receipts and get reimbursed. Now, there are some grants, I've heard some exceptions where sometimes they will advance the money up front, but that's very, very unlikely. And it's very slim that happens. So you're going to want to make sure that you understand and you have and your executive directors and your business office has a strong understanding of what's going to be required if you get a grant. I'm not going to read all of this, but these are some really important things for you to know about for accrual accounting. Again, this will be presented to you in the presentation when you get that. But notice on there, conduct regular audits. Now, it's very intentional. It doesn't say yearly audits. It says regular audits. Follow your policy. Make sure you're tracking your expenses, you're establishing a budget, you're ensuring compliance, all those kinds of things here. Now, something that I see regularly happen when I tell you that nothing ever goes perfect with a grant, the common thing that I see happen in grants is that money is not being spent when we said it was going to regularly, because many of us, it's not our full-time job. So we're doing it, we're playing catch up a lot. And one of the best ways to know if a grant is off track is to see that no money is being spent out of the budget, because you're not buying the stuff, you're not offering the program, you're not hiring. I mean, most people hire folks really quickly. That's not usually the problem, but usually holding the events, spending the money, doing the marketing, all those kinds of things. If you see money's not being spent, you need to stop and go, let's get everybody together. What's going on? With this stuff that we've got a timeline here. We said we were going to do things by a certain date. It doesn't appear to be happening. So it's a good way, it's a knee-jerk way to look and see whether or not things are happening when they're supposed to happen. So we talked about your audits, but will I get audited by the federal government? Yes, yes. Now, you're not going to get audited every time. You're not going to get audited in every grant. Some grants you will. But they recently changed in the OMB A133 audit requirements. It used to be if you had $750,000 in federal funds that you would be subject to. Now, that's the language they use. Subject to. Doesn't mean that you're going to be audited next month. but they raise that to $1 million. Now that's projects. That could be 4 grants. It doesn't mean 1 grant for $1 million, but if you have 4 grants and they total $1 million or more, you are going to be subject to a federal audit. Now, there are certain funders. USDA Distance Learning and Telemedicine Program is an example. They audit. That you close out the grant, they're going to come see you within 3 to 6 months, and they will audit. So you just have to see what the funder says, but you need to go into this eyes wide open that if I'm going to start receiving federal grant dollars and I end up with $1 million in funding, even if it's 3 or 4 different funders, they may come knocking, and you hopefully will have all of your ducks in a row.
And Melissa, I want to jump in just real quick. And, I'm reflecting on my experience when I led a nonprofit. I found that even a lot of the private foundations, the smaller foundations, were requesting proof of audits, as we were going there applying for funds from them. So I don't think audits are just, I don't want anyone to think it's just for the federal grants. I mean, private foundations require that as well, to even get through the door, and
I agree.
when I took over the nonprofit at the time, there had never been an audit, which I thought was insane. And so we implemented that process. We implemented that policy because we were held back from being eligible for so many of those smaller foundations and those private foundations, those funds, because we didn't have proof of an audit, and not having that one thing kept us from being eligible in so many situations.
Well, and the understanding behind that is, can we trust this organization? And since it's an external audit by an official accounting firm, and hopefully you've not made an arrangement with a brother-in-law, it really is a standalone independent audit. And so they're like, yeah, okay, these folks go through an audit. We can have confidence that our money could be trusted with them. So I understand it. It's certainly absolutely not unreasonable. It's just something that you need to find a way to do. Now, lots of people will say, okay, well, let's get John, the CPA down there, to join our board, and then he can do our audit for us pro bono. What do you think about that? How do you think that would work? I see somebody shaking their head no. Hillary, I'm going to call on you. Tell me why that's not a good thing.
Well, it's a big conflict of interest. They have skin in the game, and it's taking away the ability, what's the word? Not just conflict of interest, but it's, gosh, I am so tongue-tied. I apologize. But
No.
basically it is they don't have an outside perspective.
Yeah, I mean,
You're involved in
That's right. They're involved in the day-to-day. And how do you know that audit is being completed with integrity? And how do you know that board member who's a CPA who's going to do that audit doesn't have a vested interest in doing something else? So yes. So some folks think that's the way to get it done, but it's not. There's going to be a problem with your conflict of interest policy. So that you really cannot get away. You just need to pay for it. Now, there is a CPA in our community who does pro bono audits, but he's not on their board. Okay. So he's got so much work. I mean, he's got a very large firm and he does very well, and he wants to give back. He doesn't do it for but he's got a certain set of organizations that he supports, and he does do work pro bono. But to bring somebody on the board in hopes you can get a free one, that's not going to work. Okay. So speaking of boards, many private foundations, they want to know what the board composition is. If you have a bunch of old white men on your board, you really need to rethink it. Okay. There needs to be diversity. There needs to be diversity on your board. Well, our board isn't like that right now. Okay. Do you have term limits? Are you enforcing the term limits? Do you have some people that are in name only? You've got some folks that need to roll off. Oh, well, you don't understand, it's a small town and, you know, we can't upset Joe and all. I understand, but that's not what our organization is about, right? And so we need to get to a place where we have a nice, diverse, engaged board. Now, when I say engaged, are they actively engaged? And funders, I'll give you an example, Steel Reese Foundation as an example. They serve here in Kentucky. I know them well, but they also serve in Wyoming. If there's anybody on the call from Wyoming. They look for financial contributions. Is the board financially contributing? Now, they don't ask for the dollar amounts, but they want to know what percentage of your board is actively giving to your organization. So it's something you need to think about. Also, does your board reflect the people that you are serving? So do you have people in your community, not the movers and shakers, not just the influencers? Do you have people that you are serving and helping? Are they represented on your board? So you need to make sure that your board is diverse. I was on a board and we were not old white men, but we were old white men and women. And we looked around at each other and said, we're old white men and women, we need to do something about this. And so we had board members who agreed to roll off, and we brought in some people that didn't look like us. We brought in younger folks, and we brought in people who were different color, a variety. And so now that board is very diverse. And in fact, I ended up rolling off, and my daughter, who is 25, rolled on. And so although she still looks like me, she's 25. She doesn't have gray hair. So, you know, it's good to make sure that you've got good representation within your organization.
Melissa, we have a question. So
Yes.
Karen asks, I'm a director employed by the city, but also serving as the director for a nonprofit. Well, are you saying you have two roles, Karen? I'm assuming. So she's a director employed by the city, but also serving as the director for the nonprofit created for a Main Street program. Okay, that's kind of common. Should I not be applying for grants in my name for the nonprofit?
So no, you can if you have a standalone 501c3. Now, my question is, does that organization, how or if is that organization accountable to the county or the city? Is there any accountability there, Karen? And I see you just turned off your mute.
I'm not sure how to answer that. What do you mean by accountability?
So, who does your organization have to report to or be accountable to the city or the county in any way? Okay,
No.
then absolutely you can apply in your own name. It's only if your paycheck was coming from there, or if the county or the city had some type of governance over you, and it would show how it. Okay, explain that to me. And
so I'm an employee of the city.
Okay, that's okay. That's okay.
Who created the Main Street program, but because it's kind of required that you have a nonprofit, we have a separate nonprofit board.
Okay, well, so I think you could apply for grants in two different ways. You could apply for a grant as your 501c3, but I think also your county or your city, whoever's most closely aligned to the downtown stuff, could also apply. And that's actually good because that would increase capacity. But understand this, if the county applies for something, it has to be managed at the county level or the city level, whoever applies. It has to be managed at their level. The checks have to be written and have to come from there. Even though it might benefit your project, it has to come from there. Does that kind of make sense? So whereas if you're applying, then the buck stops with you. You have to make sure the money is being spent. You have to make sure that all the boxes are getting checked and everything's getting paid for. Does that Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, questions about board? Okay, here is some things that you probably have in place, but I want to talk through it. To apply for federal grants, you must have a UEI number through sam.gov. Okay. So you probably already have an EIN number to the IRS, but you need to make sure you have a UEI number. And it's a big, long number. It's this long. It's this long. It's really big, and it's a combination of letters and numbers. And I don't know, it's probably 20 or 25 digits. It's a really long number, but you have to apply for that. Doesn't cost anything. Lots of times you'll get emails and they'll say, you know, give us some money and we'll do that. You don't have to do that. But I will tell you that going through the process is complicated and takes time. If you have a grant due in 2 days and you don't have an EIN number, you're not going to have your EIN number in time. You need to allow 4 to 6 weeks for you to complete the process and get the UEI number from sam.gov. But at the same time, after you get the UEI number, you also have to use that to create an account in grants.gov. And it doesn't take a long time, but it's a process. And in that grants.gov account, you need to have an authorized representative, and that is the person where the buck stops here. That's the person that says, yes, I agree to this project. I can obligate my organization. So if you do not have the authority to obligate your organization, you will not be the AOR, or the authorized representative. Then you'll also have to put a business person in there, but then you can put in like me, the worker bee. You can put yourself in there as, you know, I'm the person who's in there doing the real work. And then, you know, people will be signing off on different things, but I'm in there doing the work. But you, go right
I'm
ahead.
sorry, Melissa. I know you want me to interrupt you. I just still feel weird doing it every time.
No, please do.
All right, we have a couple questions. Someone asked, is the UEI number the same as the DUNS number? Have they renamed that?
It is not the same number, but it was the same purpose.
Okay.
Years ago, the DUNS number was the sam.gov number. About, I'm going to say 5 years, give or take, they changed it to the UEI number. And so you had to go into sam.gov and you had to click some buttons and do some stuff, and they reassigned you this new longer number. So if you go, oh, well, we've got a DUNS number and you don't know if you've got a UEI number, you need to make sure you get that taken care of. Here's the other very important thing to note. It expires every 12 months. And I know of an organization that was 2 days away from applying, only to find out that their UEI number had expired and they were unable to submit their application. Somebody within your organization needs to be accountable to make sure that that number stays renewed every year. Okay. Also, coming back to grants.gov, you yourself can apply, you personally, not your organization, at no charge. You can go in and set up your own account in grants.gov. Your entity has to set up an account, and then you have to link the two. Okay. You can see how this is sounding confusing and complicated, because it is. And that's why you cannot wait until the last minute. Okay. I'll give you just 1 second.
No, you're fine. No worries. I see a couple more questions coming through in the chat. So I'll make sure.
Yes.
Oh, okay, you're there. Okay, awesome. So Autumn says, and this kind of probably falls into relationship management too, which I think is a big part of board management, especially when it comes to the sort of topics we're talking about today. But are there any tips for having the hard conversation with your board of directors that you need to diversify, that there needs to be new voices on the board?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. you can point to particular grant funders and say, look at this, we could go after this, but look what they're asking for. They're talking about diversity of our board and we don't have it. I can even give you the example of the USDA federal funders. So that funder, after you get the grant, they have a form for you to fill out to tell them how many male and how many female and what the ethnicity is of your board or your leadership. And so they want to know those things, even federal funders. Now, I know things are changing. I understand that. We'll see where all that goes. But until all that trickles down, you need to understand that it is something and plus it's just the right thing to do, right? And it's just the right thing to do. And so you need to know about your board. And so you can't go around asking, well, what race do you identify as? But for people who are public and open about that, if somebody is public and open about being LGBTQ, you can talk about that. Now, again, you don't go ask, that's not appropriate. But if somebody is open about this is what it is, then you can report that when you, because many will ask, they want a list of board of directors and they want to know what their affiliation is. And if you're comfortable, you don't have to put out beside their name, but down at the bottom, you can say we have 30% that are this and 20% or 50% or 60% or whatever. You're not going to call anybody out by name, but you can document that. And also you need to have conversations about term limits. And if you don't have bylaws, I'm sure you do, but if you're an old organization, you may not have looked at them in 30 years. Maybe they need to be updated, or maybe the term limits need to be enforced. And there's a reason behind that, not because you're just trying to kick Joe off the board. Maybe he needs to be kicked off the board, but we're not going to say that.
Well, and I think too, when I think about more board management and board creation and really pulling together a group of people, for me, the guiding light is they have to look like the community. They have to reflect the community.
100%.
People should be able to see themselves in one shape or form or another in the board makeup, and like I said earlier in the chat, diversity means 1,000 different things. There's so many ways to approach building a board that reflects your community, but we have to make sure that the board looks like the people you're serving. I think that kind of has always been my guiding light when I think about board management.
I think the old way, okay, the good old boy old way is the old white men had the money and the connections. That was the thought, right? The old white men had the money and the connections, and without the old white men, we're not going to be able to get in the door here or do. That's not the way it is anymore. Things are very different. And we do not need to think that that's where all of the power is. We're capable. We can do this work. We don't need that. So anyhow, I hope that answered the question. But at the end of the day, it's going to have to be a tough conversation with your board. So again, we had the conversation and we had volunteers roll off the board so that we could bring in more diverse folks. So hopefully another board would do something similar. Okay, so as we've gone through this, we're almost to the end. As we have gone through this, you might have heard a lot of things that are like, oh yeah, we're not ready. Yeah, no, we're not ready for a large federal grant. What are we going to do? Well, there are things to do. There are ways for you to think about how to approach becoming grant ready. We'll spend just a couple of moments here talking about, you can see the list. I'm not going to read it to you, but I do want to spend a little bit of time here talking about data tracking systems. You absolutely need to make sure within your organization that you have a longitudinal data tracking system. Oh my gosh, how much does that cost? Well, if you have Excel, you could have a longitudinal data tracking system. You do not have to have any kind of special software, but you do need to track your data. So what funders want to know in your grant application is where are you starting? We call that the baseline. If you don't know where you're starting, so let's just take parking spots for an example. Most of you probably know about how many parking spots that you've got. But what else can you tell me about those parking spots? Besides, we just have 1,324. What can you tell me about them? Can you break out? Can you talk about how many are close to these businesses? How many are close to the eating establishments? How many are handicap accessible? You probably know that. But how can you break out that data? Not just a count, right? Where are they located? Are they in the busy areas? Or are they in the slow areas? You know, is it dilapidated? Is it new? Are they striped? Are they, you know, does it require parallel parking? You know, how many are easy for people that are aging or other kinds of disabilities? You know, what's accessible, right? So you have to know that. You have to know that data, and that's your baseline. And then you have to set a target. We're going to improve or we're going to change this by some amount. You're going to make more accessible. You're going to make more parking available in an area that doesn't have parking right now. Okay. And maybe you even take away other parking to move it somehow. I don't know in what way you would do that, but maybe hypothetically, maybe you're going to trade places with somebody and you're going to give somebody else that space. You're going to build parking down here. But you have to know what that target is. And then you have to be able to report out on it. Did you accomplish what you said you were going to accomplish? Now, parking spots is really easy. What becomes difficult is when you're changing percentages of perception, of engagement, of understanding and knowledge. Because where's the baseline? How many people know about what's going on downtown? Maybe you've got to somehow survey that and do a needs assessment. Again, you don't have to pay folks to do it, but you need to have a good, solid needs assessment to create the baseline. And then what is a reasonable target of how you're going to improve whatever you're doing? And then how are you going to track and report out on what you achieved? I find in small organizations, even city and local government, they do not have data tracking systems and processes. And you will be in trouble quickly with a funder if you can't put out that kind of data. So if you don't have data tracking systems, I'm going to tell you today that you need to get them yesterday. You need to set those up and you need to put those in place. Use Excel. Maybe you have a data tracking software system. That's fine if you do, but you don't have to. But you need something that you can rely on. And then you can see there's some other things in here that's kind of recapping things you can do today. You can go ahead and evaluate. What is the community needs assessment? Get out there and do some surveying. Get out and do some polls. Get among the people and ask questions and put a nice colored shirt on and with your logo and go ask questions and you know, find things out. You need to develop those accounting practices. You need to figure out who your team is. Do you need your external partners? Again, you're not going to cold call any partners. You're going to start building those partner relationships right now. You can start with small grants. Many of you probably have a community foundation. That's a great place to start. Walmart is a great place to start. Now, most of you said you had already gotten grants. Don't know what kind of grants. But always, if you've not, or if you don't have a lot of experience in big grants, start small and start building that capacity. Look for foundations in your state that you can develop a relationship with. Figure out who's on that board. That's another thing we can talk about is how you can figure out who to talk to. But you need to figure out who's on there and cultivate those relationships and start small and build capacity.